you think about role-playing games, you become friends with certain characters in that game.
Yeah.
They don't remember much about you. They're just telling a story. It's
Yeah.
exactly what you're saying. They exist in that virtual world. But if they acknowledge that you exist in this physical world, if the characters in the game remember that you exist, that you, like for me, like
Yeah.
Lex, they understand that I'm a human being who has like hopes and dreams and so on. It seems like there's going to be a like billions, if not trillions, of cosmos in the world. So if we look at that future, there's several questions to ask. How intelligent does that future cosmo need to be to create fulfilling relationships like friendships?
Yeah, it's a great question, and part of it was the recognition that it's going to take time to get there because it has to be a lot more intelligent. Because what's good enough to be a magical experience for an 8-year-old, it's a higher bar to do that, be a like a pet in the home, or to help with functional interface in an office environment or in a home, or and so forth. And the idea was that you build on that and you kind of get there. And as technology becomes more prevalent and less expensive and so forth, you can start to kind of work up to it. But you're absolutely right. At the end of the day, we almost equated it to how the touchscreen created like this really novel interface to physical kind of devices like this. This is the extension of it, where you have much richer physical interaction in the real world. This is the enabler for it, and it shows itself in a few kind of really obvious places. So just take something as simple as a voice assistant. Most people will never tolerate an Alexa or a Google Home just starting a conversation proactively when you weren't kind of expecting it, because it feels weird. It's like you were listening and then now you're kind of it feels intrusive. But if you had a character like a cat that touches you and gets your attention, or a toddler, like you never think twice about it. And what we found really kind of immediately is that these types of characters like Cosmo, and they would like roam around and kind of get your attention. And we had a future version that was always on, kind of called Vector. People were way more forgiving. And so you could initiate interaction in a way that is not acceptable for machines. And in general, there's a lot of ways to customize it, but it makes people who are skeptical of technology much more comfortable with it. There were a couple of really, really prominent examples of this. So when we launched in Europe, and so we were in I think like a dozen countries, if I remember correctly, but like we went pretty aggressively in launching in Germany and France and UK, and we were very worried in Europe because there's obviously like a socially higher bar for privacy and security, where you've heard about how many companies have had troubles on things that might have been okay in the US, but like are just not okay in Germany and France in particular. And so we were worried about this because you have Cosmo, who's in our future product Vector, like where you have cameras, you have microphones, it's cloud connected, and like you're playing with kids and like in these experiences, and you're like, this is like ripe to be like a nightmare if you're not careful.
Yes.
And the journalists are like notoriously like really, really tough on these sort of things. We were shocked, and we prepared so much for what we would have to encounter. We were shocked in that not once from any journalists or customer did we have any complaints beyond like a really casual kind of question. And it was because of the character, where when conversation came up, it was almost like, well, of course he has to see and hear. How else is he going to be alive and interacting with you? And it completely disarmed this like fear of technology that enabled this interaction to be much more fluid. And again, like entertainment was a proving ground, but that is like there's like ingredients there that carry over to a lot of other elements down the road.
That's hilarious that we're a lot less concerned about privacy if the thing has value and charisma. I mean, that's true for all of human to human interaction too.
It's an understanding of intent where like, well, he's looking at me, he can see me. If he's not looking at me, he can't see me, right? So it's almost like you're communicating intent, and with that intent, people were like kind of a more understanding and calmer. And it's interesting. And it was just the earliest kind of version of starting to experiment with this, but it was an enabler. And then you have like completely different dimensions where like, kids with autism had like an incredible connection with Cosmo that just went beyond anything we'd ever seen. And we have like this just letters that we would receive from parents, and we had some research projects kind of going on with some universities on studying this. But there's an interesting dimension there that got unlocked that just hadn't existed before, that has these really interesting kind of links into society and a potential building block of future experiences.
So, if you look out into the future, do you think we will have beyond a particular game, a companion like her, like the movie Her, or like a Cosmo that's kind of asks you how your day went too, right?
Yeah.
Like a friend.
Yeah.
How many years away from that do you think we are? What's your intuition?
Good question. So I think the idea of a different type of character, like more closer to like kind of a pet style companionship, will come way faster. And there's a few reasons. One is like to do something like in Her, that's like effectively almost general AI, and the bar is so high that if you miss it by a bit, you hit the uncanny valley where it just becomes creepy and not appealing. Because the closer you try to get to a human in form and interface and voice, the harder it becomes. Whereas you have way more flexibility on still landing a really great experience if you embrace the idea of a character. And that's why one of the other reasons why we didn't have a voice, and also why like a lot of video game characters, like Sims, for example, does not have a voice. When you think about it, it wasn't just a cost savings like for them. It was actually for all of these purposes. It was because when you have a voice, you immediately narrow down the appeal to some particular demographic or age range or kind of style or gender. If you don't have a voice, people interpret what they want to interpret, and an 8-year-old might get a very different interpretation than a 40-year-old. But you create a dynamic range, and so you can lean into these advantages much more in something that doesn't resemble a human, and so that'll come faster. I don't know when a human that's just still like just complete R&D at this point. The chat interfaces are getting way more interesting and richer, but it's still a long way to go to kind of pass the test of.
Well, let's consider, let me play devil's advocate. So Google is a very large company that's servicing, it's creating a very compelling product that wants to provide a service to a lot of people. But let's go outside of that. You said characters.
Yeah.
It feels like, and you also said that it requires general intelligence to be a successful participant in a relationship, which could explain why I'm single. But I honestly want to push back on that a little bit, because I feel like, is it possible that if you're just good at playing a character, you're in a movie, there's a bunch of characters. If you just understand what creates compelling characters, and then you just are that character and you exist in the world, and other people find you and they connect with you just like you do when you talk to somebody at a bar. I like this character. This character's kind of shady. I don't like them. You pick the ones that you like, and maybe it's somebody that's reminds you of your father or mother. I don't know what it is, but the Freudian thing. But there's some kind of connection that happens, and that's the Cosmo you connect to. That's the future Cosmo you connect, and that's. So I guess the statement I'm trying to make, is it possible to achieve a depth of friendship without solving general intelligence?
I think so. And it's about intelligent kind of constraints, right? And just you set expectations and constraints such that in the space that's left, you can be successful. And so you can do that by having a very focused domain that you can operate in. For example, you're a customer support agent for a particular product, and you create intelligence and a good interface around that. Or kind of in the personal companionship side, you can't be everything to across the board. You kind of solve those constraints, and I think it's possible. My worry is I right now I don't see anybody that has picked up on where kind of Cosmo left off, and is pushing on it in the same way. And so I don't know if it's a sort of thing where, similar to like how in .com there were all these concepts that we considered like that didn't work out or like failed or like were too early or whatnot, and then 20 years later you have these like incredible successes on almost the same concept. Like it might be that sort of thing where like there's another pass at it that happens in 5 years or in 10 years, but it does feel like that appreciation of that, like the three-legged stool, if you will, between like the hardware, the AI, and the character, that balance. It's hard to. I'm not aware of anywhere right now where like that same kind of aggressive drive with the value on the character is
Yeah.
happening. And so,
To me, just a prediction, exactly as you said, something that looks awfully a lot like Cosmo, not in the actual physical form, but in the three-legged stool. Something like that in some number of years will be $1 trillion company. I don't understand. Like, it's obvious to me
yeah,
that, like, character, not just as robotic companions, but in all our computers, they'll be there. It's like Clippy was like two legs of that stool or something like that.
yeah,
I mean, those are all different attempts. And what's really confusing to me is they're born these attempts, and they everybody gets excited, and for some reason they die,
hmm
and then nobody else tries to pick it up. And then maybe a few years later, a crazy guy like you comes around with just enough brilliance and vision to create this thing, and is born. A lot of people love it. A lot of people get excited, but maybe the timing is not right yet.
yeah,
And then when the timing is right, it just
yeah.
blows up. It just keeps blowing up more and more until it just blows up, and I guess everything in the
That's right.
full span of human civilization collapses eventually.
Yeah.
But
And that wouldn't surprise me at all. And like, what's going to be different in another 5 years or 10 years or whatnot? Physical component costs will continue
cheaper.
to come down in price. And, mobile devices and computation is going to become more and more prevalent, as well as cloud as a big tool to offload cost. AI is going to be a massive transformation compared to what we dealt with, where everything from voice understanding to just kind of a broader contextual understanding and mapping of semantics and understanding scenes and so forth. And then the character side will continue to kind of progress as well, because that magic does exist. It just exists in different forms. And you have just the brilliance of that's happening in animation and in these other areas where that was a big unlock in film, obviously. And so I think the pieces can reconnect, and the building blocks are actually going to be way more impressive than they were 5 years ago. So.